Hello everyone, thank you so much for all your support in my previous videos. So by now you guys must have submitted your CARMS application and we are in an interim phase where we're so anxious. This time is really worrisome for all the applicants because we are waiting for the interview calls. And any information in this time is really helpful because I understand, like, I've been through this time last year and I know how it feels like. So I'm going to talk about everything that might be helpful for you in this time and what are the things to do in the interim, like where before you hear back on your interview. So let's see the timeline. By now it's December. So by 8 December was the new deadline for supplementary application window. So now let's talk about January. 13 January is the deadline. Interview offer status updates in CARMS online. So by 13 January would be the time where that would be the deadline for interview offer status update in CARMS application. So how the process works. Let's talk about the process first, just so you have a clear idea on how are you gonna hear back about your interview and what's the process like. Let's just talk about all those things, right? And then we'll go through the interview, what are the things to prepare for, and then I'll talk a bit about my own experience. So this video collectively should be helpful for all the applicants who have submitted their applications and now waiting for the interview. So let's talk about how do you get to hear back about your interview invites, right? So once you've submitted your application online in CARMS, so you would get interview invite either through CARMS application itself, or you might receive an email in your personal email, the email that you've provided. So there are two options. Usually in the first iteration, they update it on the CARMS as well as they send you emails. But specifically in the second iteration, they do not update it on CARMS. Not every program is updated on CARMS, and they would just personally send you the email. So check your emails. I understand, like, every now and then it's hard to sleep. But yeah, keep on checking your emails, keep on checking the spam emails or other emails just to make sure you're not missing out on anything. And I understand this must be very, very, stressful time for all of you, but try to exercise and meditate and have those techniques to help yourself relax, because the time has to pass and time will pass ultimately, but you need to stay in on track. You have to stay in good mental health to make sure you are doing well on your interviews, right? Let not the anxiety cover your competitiveness or your all those things that you have to show up in your interviews, right? So coming back to the timeline, so this is the time where you might probably be hearing back about your interview invites. So last year how it worked was like, the Ontario invites were coming out almost in December. Mid to late December and early January was the time we heard back on that. And then people, Dalhousie and Nosum were the schools who sent their interview later in December and January. So Ontario invites are usually given in one go. Like, people would hear or not hear. Like, within 3 to 4 days, you'll get to know if you got an invite or no. If you did not get an invite, that means you're not getting it in this iteration. They would never come back, later on the week and week after or so to tell you that you have an invite. No, they do it within 3 to 4 days, and that's about it. Either you receive it or you don't receive it for first iteration. So it's a collective invite for all the medical schools in Ontario. So you wouldn't hear separately for, let's say, McMaster, you're hearing another email, or University of Toronto, you're hearing another. No, that's not the case. One email for all Ontario invites. And then let's talk about so yeah, so that's how it works. So rest of all the information is usually for first iteration is updated on your CARMS application. So you have that table where you have submitted the application, so it would show either you received an invite or no. And you would receive email for every, let's say, if you're not invited for an interview, or any rejection, so you would receive rejection emails too. For any update on CARMS that is being updated as a rejection, you would receive a separate email on that. That's usually very frustrating, and you don't really like those kind of emails, but yeah, you just have to ignore if you haven't received an email. So yeah. So moving forward, you receive your let's say you receive your application invite or your interview invite. Now you know you've been already working on your interview preparation, and this is a time you got to work on that. We'll talk more about it later in this video, but for now I'm just talking about the process, like how it works. So it would be updated on your CARMS account, and the deadline for the interview invite is 13 January 2026. So after 13th January, nobody usually receives interview invite. This is the time that you would receive an invite. I hope everybody does. So let's say by 13 or 14 January, you're not hearing, even on 14 January, like by the time they say 13 January is the deadline, that means it is the deadline. And if you don't hear back in this time, that means you start preparing for your second iteration. For people who haven't had any interview or are not given any invite for the first iteration, start preparing for the second one and start working on like what are the things to work on in the second iteration. For people who have received an interview invite in the first iteration, now what are the things that you gotta work on? So you gotta start preparing for interview preparation, which you have already been doing, I'm sure. And then we'll talk about like what are the things to and how do you start preparing for interview. Okay. So these are like the small hyperlinks which you can click, and you will get to know your interview status. National interview period starts from 17 January to 8 February. So I would suggest like anyone who has got an interview invite, or you're scheduling some of your events or something you have on your schedule, make sure you're not scheduling anything between 17 January to 8 February, because that's the time where they usually invite you for interview. They don't go beyond these dates. So this is a time that you got to book for yourself, that you might get an interview and you're not available between 17 January to 8 February. Okay. So that's that. And then by 22nd January 2026, the ranking period begins. So what happened is like once you're done with your interview, the second step is like by 22nd January, you'll get a notification from CARMS that you have to start your ranking. And in that ranking order list, like you rank your programs. Let's say I interviewed with Queens, Ottawa, NOSM, and Manitoba and all those universities. So I ranked my programs in an order. So let's say if you're not interviewed with certain university and you're like, oh, should I rank it or no? So I would still rank it, but down the list, because you would rank the first you have interviewed with. And there's a very common question. Let's say if you have not interviewed with certain university, would you still rank them? You would still rank them, but if you've interviewed with certain university, so you would keep that university on the top, because that's where they would even rank you as well. Because if let's say a medical school has not interviewed you, and would they keep you on the list? mm, Less likely, but down the list probably. So you would still rank them, but even down the list, because they haven't interviewed you and they don't know you. So interview is an important component, right? I hope that's making sense. And if you have any questions in between like these things, you can comment down below, and I'll be happy to help you with them. And then you start ranking. So in my rank order list, it was like I ranked my top choices on the first, and then I ranked the least one below, and the one I did not interviewed with, I did also rank them, but it doesn't really makes a difference. 19 February is the application rank order list deadline. So by 22nd to 19, you have to rank your list. So I will make a separate video on that as well, because there are a few things on ranking that I have to talk about, like what are the components to consider, where are the resources that you can check online, like which are the resources to read up online before you rank your list. So these are the things I'm going to talk in future videos, hopefully. And then 2nd March 2026 is a pre-match day. And then 3rd March is 2026 is the match day. So pre-match day, not sure, you don't really have to do anything until the match day. So you probably will receive your results on your CARMS application. That's where you usually you get to know that you've matched first. You don't receive any additional emails unless you check your results on your CARMS application first. So there is a result tab on the CARMS application, and that's where you get to know about if you've matched, if you're not matched. Because I was in both iterations. First iteration it says unfortunately, and then the second one says congratulations, you've matched. So that's how I hope it comes out. Congratulations for every one of you. And then 13 May comes access closes. So 13 May is the time where comes access closes. Let's say for people who do not get any interviews in the first iteration, what are they going to do now? So they have to go up again and they have to start working on the second iteration. There's a tab on CARMS website that says second iteration. So you'll click on that tab and you start reading all about your deadline. So CARMS open for applicants is January and then February, because January was the time where you receive your interview invites, right? Let's say if you haven't received any interview invites, start looking for program description for second iteration. Sometimes in second iteration they do change some component of your program description, so you got to make sure that you're reading through it, you're not missing out on minor details that they have changed. And then the application closes by the 3rd March is so 3rd March was a time where we get match results, but that's the time where access to CARMS online for unmatched applicants open. Let's say if you have applied for first iteration and you've got unmatched in the first iteration, now in the second iteration you will be able to start working on your application on 3rd March once the results are out. You are not able to work on your application until unless the match day has come, which is the 3rd March for next year, right? So for people who do not get any interview invite, start working on your application, start working to read program descriptions, but you'll be only able to start working on your CARMS application after 3rd March. So 5th March is the time your program description of unfilled position from first iteration approved. So they will review their program descriptions again. By 5th March will be the finalized program description that would be available on CARMS application. And then the selection opens by 5th March. So the timeline for second iteration is quite, it's close. So you got to make sure that you're keeping up to date. And I would suggest like either having a screenshot of these timelines or at least write them on a notebook or a paper for yourself just to make sure you're keeping up with them. 9th March is a transcript deadline like MSPR. So question comes here like for second iteration, can we reuse the referees or the reference letters that you used in the first one? I would highly suggest you can use them. It doesn't really make a difference, but if you have any additional people who can write references for you, that would be a great idea as well. So you can like pick and choose which one you want. Okay. 16 March is the reference submission deadline and 17 March is an application deadline. File review begins on the 17th and the final day is the 21st of April for 2026. So 21st April is the second iteration match results day. Last year I remember it was 17th April, I guess. So this year it is 21st April. So things haven't really changed a lot since last year, but yeah. So now I have gone through the process, like how it works, how are you going to receive. Okay, for second iteration, I forgot to mention that you will receive email instead of having a comms update about your interview invites. So keep an eye on your emails as well. But for first iteration, they highly would put it on your comms application. They're supposed to put it up on your comms application for the invite. Either it would show as a green tick or a red cross. That's how it shows up. A red cross for rejection and green tick for interview invite. And you do separately receive an email in your personal email as well that you have received a notification in your a message in your comms application. So you gotta check it. So that's how it works. And then let's say if you've received so post match, let's just quickly talk about post match as well. So post match is a period for people, let's say, who have gone unmatched in the second iteration. Now there's still some seats left. So some schools would open up post match as well. They would participate. Let's say if they have some certain unfilled seats, so they would probably their application would be open. So but you have to like directly email them, and that is not done through comms. They would you would have to just approach them through emails, and but this information would be uploaded on the comms as well, like if a certain program is participating in post match. So this is for, let's say, after second iteration, if the seats are still remaining, they would put it up, they would participate in post match, and you would be notified on that as well if you've gone unmatched. Now coming to the interview preparation. So for interview preparation, what I would suggest is start working on the interview part of, um, let's say we are going through this. So in this part, in the program description, if you scroll all the way down, So once you've submitted your application, this is up till here. This is up till, let's say, your application submission is up till here, where we're talking about CV and personal statement. Now comes the review process. So application submitted after file review has opened on 27 will not be considered, will not be considered. So you gotta ignore this. Now interviews. Interview is date is 16 January. For every program, you will see the interview date on their program description. So let's say you're expecting that you should be able to hear back on this program from this site. So for Ontario, it doesn't really makes a difference, but each school has their own date for interview. It's January 16th is the date, and it would be a virtual interview to be held on 16 January. Registration time will be provided to those invited for interview. Programs will notify all applicants through CARMS online, that's what we discussed about, and will also send an email invitation directly to applicants selected for an interview. One interview for all Ontario programs in the first iteration, but second iteration, every program has its own interviews. Let's say Queens has its own interview, Ottawa has its own interview, U of T will have its own interview depending on the number of seats they have available, right? So, first iteration, one interview for all Ontario school programs sounds more competitive, and it is more competitive for sure, the first iteration. Second iteration becomes less competitive and has more options to match, because depending on the number of seats available, and you'll be able to see that through program descriptions as well, like how many seats they have now in the second iteration. So as per AFMC decision, match interviews will occur in virtual format. You will not be required to travel, so it still is a virtual interview. Now selection criteria: pre-residency program. All IMGs accepted to residency will be required to complete PRP prior to entering the residency program. Match IMG will be expected to PR. So PRP is something that you're not supposed to worry about for now. Once you match, that's when they will approach you directly. Observership is not considered clinical experience. Participation in a residency training program in family medicine and clinical practice in family medicine equivalent will be favored in a ranking. So what are they preferring? Residency training program family medicine. Either you've done residency in family medicine or in clinical practice in family medicine, or you have experience in family medicine, and its equivalent will be favored in a ranking process. Program goals. So let's say if you got an invite from so and so program, so start looking for their goals. So our curriculum is carefully designed to enable graduate residents to care for patients across the lifespan, ensure a work-life balance centered in wellness, demonstrate professionalism, empathy, effective communication skill, gain, demonstrate quality improvement, can measure. So make sure you go through all these selection processes, and then let's talk about interview. So interview process. Let's say you are interviewing at Ottawa. So the interview process is traditional: one on one or two on one. One on one is like one preceptor and you. Two on one is like one preceptor and maybe a senior resident with their preceptors and you, like three of you. Panel interview is where let's say 3 to 4 people are sitting and they would ask you question one by one. MMI or rotating station is like, let's say you've got 5 to 10 minutes on certain station, and then you would change your stations. You would go to different rooms through Zoom or certain other apps. So MMI is something that people who have done BC Cap MMI would know like how it works. So you will have like 5 to 7 different stations where virtually, and you will have to like step in each station, and you will have a different question asked in that particular station, right? So interview evaluation criteria. So every program description has this table on it, and make sure when you start preparing for interview, you follow these components, because let's say collaboration skills, they would ask you something with collaboration skills. Demonstrate a good understanding of importance of collaboration in family medicine. So collaboration in context of family medicine, collegiality, respecting for your colleagues, communication skills, strong communication skills, health advocacy, interest in discipline, interest in program, leadership skills, professionalism, scholarly activities. The questions in interview will rotate around these components, so make sure you are well versed with them. Information gathering outside. The behavior exhibit during interview process may prevent an applicant from being ranked. So these are the behaviors. Try not to do them. And so yeah, match your passion at the University of Ottawa. So these are the things that you gotta review once you're, let's say you've got, so, for let's say if you got an interview invite for Ontario, because Ottawa is in Ontario, so I wouldn't really go into details of each one of them, but I would still say, let's say you are interviewing with, let me open some other program which has its own invite. Um, let's say for Dalhousie, you're doing it in Annapolis Valley. Um, Selection criteria, interview process, program highlights. So you see the interview components are similar in all of the programs. Information gathering outside of CARMS application. So you see this is different from Ontario one. Social interaction during program related events. So make sure you're attending these events. So program related events are something that they arrange and they see how you're doing on them. So make sure you attend all those program related events. You have to keep up with the dates. At times the dates would clash, like you would have one session and then other. So make sure you attend as much as you can, because the more they remember your face or your interactions with them, the higher likely they would invite you. Make sure your Zoom link name is same as your official name. You're not coming with a random name like an iPhone or so and so. You have your name, official name on the Zoom link, on the Zoom login. Communication with program administration. So at times there are program directors who are in these kind of social events, and then you'll have an opportunity to talk to the program director through those Zoom meetings. So the program administration are the people who are sitting there who are arranging all those meetings. So anytime you're interacting with them, you're talking to them about certain things, they would even rank you. They would even talk about you with the program director, so their interaction would be counted. Let's say this is for Dell houses. So in them, they are considering like these kind of things like communication with program administration, social interaction. So make sure you know these things. I would highly recommend like writing those things out on a paper. Have a very organized, uh, organized set of written plan where you're talking about different programs. You have things they are considering, and to keep up with these things, because these are very tiny things which can be easily missed. So not to miss them, it's easy to just write them out. So, talking about program highlights. So, let's say if you've received interview from Dalhousie University, I would highly recommend reviewing the program highlights. These are the things to read up online, like are there opportunities for electives, what is available to residents in the program, including rural clinical experience. So, these are the questions that they have addressed here. One very common thing that happen is like they would ask you if you have any questions, and you would be asking them, are there any opportunities for electives? So this is something which is already addressed on the CARMS program description, and you possibly might be judged there because that means you're not paying attention to details. So make sure you're not asking this question for sure. These are like nitty gritties that I'm just telling you here. It's better to ask a question related to electives, but not like are there opportunities for electives, because it has already been addressed on the website. So if you're reading through their website, if you're really interested in the program, you would highly know this information already, right? Asking further questions on like what are the most common elective positions available, or what are the common elective locations available for residents around Dalhousie University, all those kind of questions, like what are the hospitalist options available. So these are the kind of questions you can, a further extension of this information would be highly recommended to be asked in those sessions. um, Learning about different sites, and the more interest you have in certain location, you will read more about that, and that would be helpful throughout your interviews as well. Like I would highly recommend knowing and learning as much information as possible for these sites. All right. Now going back to like so we have already talked about the design to test. So what is the design of interview? It can be a traditional interview, one or two, or it could be a panel interview, or it can be an MMI style, multiple mini interview style, right? What are the things to talk about in your interview? So I would say, let's see, the things that you gotta talk about in your interview is CanMed roles. So all those things that were mentioned on the program description there, plus reading through the CanMed roles. So if we talk about the CanMed roles, professionalism, communicator, collaborator, leader, advocate, and scholar. These are the components that you're addressing throughout your interview. I would highly recommend having at least 7 to 10, 8 to 10 stories in your interview. And the interview, those stories structure should be based on these components like professionalism, communicator, collaborator, leader, and so on, right? Um, Understanding of profession is one of the most important thing. They would ask you why family medicine, so you need to have a good answer for that as well. They may assess you for problem solving skills by giving you different situational questions, like you are in a situation, you're a resident on floor, your other resident is getting late, and or how are you going to approach the situation, and you have to go to your own event or your your daughter's birthday or so and so, right? So how are you going to solve this problem? So problem solving is very essential throughout your interview. They might give you some situational questions and you need to address that in a very ethical and professionally appropriate manner. And let's talk about like what's the ethical and the most appropriate way to address these things. So if I talk about ethical scenarios, so communicate the process. You don't have to, your answer doesn't have to be right or wrong, but you are communicating the process. Let's say they have given you a situation, acknowledge the problem, acknowledge, identify the problem in that situation. Let's say I am in a situation, it's a very tough situation for me. I'm in a situation where I have a colleague who's in a problem, and then I have to hand over that colleague, but then he's not available. So going through this situation, you would address, acknowledge the problem, and then you would start your approach. Number one would be safety, patient safety. So you're not going to compromise the patient safety. If the patient requires you, you have to be there first, right? If let's say any patient is crashing during that time, you're going to be there for them. You got to make sure that at any point or any time, all the time, the physician is available to patient, right? So you're gonna keep the patient safety first, and then you will balance empathy with policy as well. So you're not gonna exploit yourself and exploit the other person as well. So you will address the problem with empathy, but keeping up with the policy as well, right? You're not expected to do wrong thing or exploit yourself, or go through a lot of exploitation just for the sake of empathy. No. So balance empathy and empathy with policy. So communicate the process and make sure whenever you're giving a situational question, let's say there are three characters in those situation, you, patient, and another resident. So you're addressing the problem in all three aspect of the situation. You're addressing your concern, you're addressing your patient safety, and then you're addressing your colleague's problem as well in a professional manner. So this is the ethical scenario. That's when you should feel satisfied that yes, I have addressed the problem and I've addressed all the people there. So that's when like you've addressed the ethical scenario appropriately. Then comes like questions like conflict, teamwork questions. So you might be asked about a situation where you were in a conflict, or you had to show yourself as a leader, or any kind of professional kind of questions where you had to show your professionalism, right? So anytime you're asked such questions, make sure you address those questions in a star method. Star is like where you're talking about the situation, like this is the situation, like acknowledging, as we spoke about the ethical scenarios as well, like acknowledging the situation. Second is task, taking responsibility of the situation. And then action, like what are the actions you're gonna do in this certain situation to address it. And then the results, what happened at the end. So what was the situation, what was the task, and what were the actions taken, and how was it resolved, and what was the conclusion, like results. So star method should be the approach to any kind of situation or storytelling kind of situation where you are telling about your professionalism, leadership, or conflict resolution kind of situations, right? um Weakness questions, you might be asked questions like weakness, tell us about your weakness. So if you're talking about your weakness, I would suggest like it's really tough to actually have weakness that you can talk profession in a professional environment, but it's equally important to stay honest with that. One best thing I would suggest with weakness question is like talking about your weakness, having awareness of it, plus talking about the growth mindset with that, right? Let's say you're talking about a very common thing that people talk about would be like, I have difficulty saying no to tasks, right? No to certain tasks or no to people around me or in a professional setup. So that is probably a weakness, which is a good weakness, but then how are you changing that? Right? What are the things that you're doing it? You're acknowledging it. Now you know that it exists. How are you keeping up with that without affecting your professionalism, right? So having the problem, having awareness of that, and then having a growth mindset with that is important, right? So I would suggest like searching a bit more about that, reflecting on your past experiences, having a story from it, and then like talk about it in a positive manner that you're aware of it and it's not something that's affecting your patient safety, but then you're also working on it in terms of growth. How is it affecting you, affecting your growth, right? And keep it very natural. You don't have to make things out of your past experiences, but make sure like you're keeping it natural and very honest. um and then, if let's say they're asking you why this profession or why this field, why internal medicine, why psychiatry or family medicine, you need to have good answers for that. I would suggest like there are, let's say, hundreds of applicants who are talking about why family medicine. So you gotta make sure like your answer is standing out, it's unique, it should be legitimate, and then it should also have a good story. um, in my interview, I'll talk more about it later in this video, but in general, like I wanted to keep more stories in my interview because that would make my interview more personalized and would help them understand more about me. There's a thing about interviews that they would tell you in the email that they're sending you, or even through the CARMS program description here. If you read through interview processes, some programs might write that that they have reviewed your CV or not, right? So in your interview, there would be people who have interviewed your CV and they're seeing you as who you are. So that's an opportunity for you to show them as if you are the best person to be hired as a resident. And there are situations where they know about your CV and they would ask you specific questions from your CV that you have mentioned these as your interests. So let's talk more about your interests. So there these are two different situations, like which could come, like either they would know about your CV and they might not even know a bit about your CV. So if they don't know about your CV, that's your opportunity to show as if you're the best person to be hired as a resident. If they know already about your CV, then again that means you have got more opportunity to talk about it, right? So both situations has their own pros and cons, um, but if they have not reviewed your CV, then you gotta make sure that you're utilizing this time at its best and not missing the opportunity for sure. All right, so uh, let's talk about mental rehearsal. So mental rehearsal is something that during this time, obviously you guys are all preparing for interviews. I would suggest start mental rehearsing your questions, mental rehearsing your answers. Have structure to your answers. For some people, like in my case, I used to write my answers, or used to write my our answers in a way that would keep me organized. Let's say if I want to follow a star approach, that is STAR approach. So I would write the situation, then I would write the task, action, and then results. So in that way, you stay focused and you stay organized. So start writing them and then start having the mental rehearsals. Let's say you're cooking, you're doing some chores, you're doing anything. Make sure you start recalling those things in your mind, because that would help you phrase your answers in an appropriate way and in a more natural way. So start doing mental rehearsals because that would be helpful. But first, in my case, like I am a kind of person who would like to write things out and then organize myself. So if that works for you, that would be helpful as well, because if you write those things down, you know where you're gonna take your step 2 and step 3 and then step 4. So that would be helpful as well. uh, and then arranging mock interviews for yourself, because at times what happened is, like, for in my case, I took two to three different mock interviews, and take feedback from people, because at times we are just speaking and we don't know at what pace we are speaking. When are we going to take the pause? If there are any certain words in the speech or in communication that we're saying again and again, there's some repetitions of words, they would tell us, right? They would tell us that these are the things that you're saying very often and you got to avoid those things, right? So that's where mock interviews are helpful, because if a third person who listens to you, they would pick things up and they would let you know, and you are aware of your problems then, right? So that's where mock interviews helps, and then you get exposed to more questions, you're exposed to more strangers, so that cuts out the stranger anxiety as well for you. So, for sure, I would highly recommend doing mock interviews. But who are the people you can do mock interviews? I would suggest doing mock interviews with seniors, people who are already in residency, your peers, your online groups, your mentors, anybody around you. Let's say if you're working in a clinical assistant position, if you have a mentor or preceptor there, I would highly recommend doing mock interviews with them. Um, and then if they ask you questions, like highly asked question is like commonly asked question is, tell me about yourself. Make sure you have a very good phrase for that, like a very good paraphrase about how are you going to talk about that. um, that question should show your personality, should show what kind of person you are. You're not a, no, you're not just a doctor. You're actually a wife or a husband. You are a father or a mother. You are a sibling, or you're a cousin, or you're a good friend. So talking more about your personal stuff in your interview would help them understand you more, and would not just give a clinical context of who you are, but also give a very rational personal experience that would make your interview sound more personal and relatable, I would say. So talking about your personality, your exposures, if you, let's say you're an IMG, you have back home experiences, so you're going to talk about those things, right? So talking about your exposures, talking about your motivations, your relevant experiences, so these are the things that you're going to make your answers out from, about talking about yourself, right? um So, I think, and then one context about Canadian healthcare landscape, like learning more about Canadian healthcare problems. There's a shortage of family physicians in Canada. Making sure that you know the reasons why do we not have a lot of family physicians here in Canada, right? Despite of having a lot of family physicians or family medicine positions in residency, what are the things that we can do to improve this shortage, right? So learning these problems, understanding their solutions, and coming up with answers on that. um, so yeah, um, I think this is about it. Now I'm just gonna talk a little more about my experiences and things that have helped me in my time. So it was exactly last year this time that I was preparing for my interviews, and what I used to do is, like, my process was the same as I have just mentioned, like going through the CARMS website, reviewing the program descriptions, the interview processes, learning about the program. Every time I used to get an interview, I used to go up their website, on especially in the second iteration, I used to go up on their website, learn more about their institute, their programs, their highlights, knowing good and bad things about their program, and then also talking through their residents, understanding their perspective, making sure my video is turned on during the sessions. And then I used to make notes of different stories that I used to have. Let's say I had like a bunch of 8 to 10 stories from my past. All stories used to have a basis, or a reason behind them, or something, or a can met component that I was addressing through them. So make sure every story should be relevant. It should have something in them to address, let's say professionalism, advocacy, or anything like that. And then having yourself organized before your interview, have a notebook or something in your hand to just write things out, and make sure you're well aware about which story are you going to talk about when they ask you about, let's say, advocacy. Which story are you going to talk about if they ask you about collaboration? So having a bunch of stories in hand, and then organizing them in a way that you need to know which story are you going to talk about if they ask you about certain component in CanMed rules. um, and then I understand like this is a very worrisome time for all of you guys who have applied for this CARMS application, but trust me, this is not the end of world. First iteration could be stressful, could be more stressful, but second iteration is usually more reasonable and is completely way different than the first one. So first one seems more competitive, and it is usually, I think, is more competitive. But don't lose hopes if you don't receive any interview. Just get through it. Just keep going, and just believe in yourself that you've come so far that you're almost there. This is just literally the last step of the entire process. You've done your QE1, you've done your NAC, OSCE, and all the MMI, Casper, FM Pro C. Now you're almost there. So trust yourself, believe in yourself. Don't hesitate to ask for help, and write any comments. If you want to ask me any questions, you can write them below, and I'll be more than happy to help you. And I think, yeah, that should be it. If there's anything, I would recommend that take as many mocks as possible and just practice, keep practicing. And good luck to all of you. And if there's anything I can address further, you can just comment down below and I'll try to address that. Thank you so much for watching this video, and make sure to subscribe to my channel to help me support and to help me keep going. Thank you.